The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not be afraid any longer, little flock, for your Father is pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your belongings and give alms. Provide money bags for yourselves that do not wear out, an inexhaustible treasure in heaven that no thief can reach or moth destroy. For where your treasure is, there also will your heart be. Gird your loins and light your lamps, and be like servants who await their master's return from a wedding, ready to open immediately when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds vigilant on his arrival. Amen, I say to you, he will gird himself, have them recline at table, and proceed to wait on them. And should he come in the second or third watch and find them prepared in this way, blessed are those servants. Be sure of this. If the master of the house had known the hour when the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be prepared, for at an hour you do not expect, the Son of Man will come." Then Peter said, "Lord, is this parable meant for us or for everyone?" And the Lord replied, "Who then is the faithful and prudent steward whom the master will put in charge of his servants to distribute the food allowance at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master on arrival finds doing so. Truly I say to you, the master will put the servant in charge of all his property. But if that servant says to himself, 'My master is delayed in coming,' and begins to beat the men servants and the maid servants, and to eat, drink, and get drunk, then that servant's master will come on an unexpected day and at an unknown hour, and will punish the servant severely and assign him a place with the unfaithful. That servant who knew his master's will, but did not make preparations nor act in accord with his will, shall be beaten severely. And the servant who was ignorant of his master's will, but acted in a way deserving of a severe beating, shall be beaten only lightly. Much will be required of the person entrusted with much, and still more will be demanded of the person entrusted with more." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Seemed like a really long gospel passage, but looking at the time on my recording devices, it was only 2 minutes long. It seemed like a lot longer than that. But anyways, we're not going to talk about the gospel today, at least not very much. I'm going to talk about the second reading. Our second reading today is from the letter to the Hebrews, which nowhere in the letter to Hebrews does it give the name of the author of the letter. Traditionally, it's assigned to St. Paul, but it doesn't say so in the letter itself. But anyways, this passage that we had from the letter to the Hebrews gives us an actual definition of one of the most important virtues that Christians can possess, and that is the virtue of faith. The letter to the Hebrews said, "Faith is the realization of what is hoped for and the evidence of things not seen." The realization of what is hoped for and the evidence of what is not seen. I'm going to break that down into two parts. First, it says, faith is the realization of what is hoped for. Now, think about those words and what those words mean. The realization of what is hoped for. In other words, we have faith when we realize the things that we hope for. We have faith when we realize the things that we long for. We have faith when we realize the things that we desire. And that isn't normally how we think of faith, isn't it? Usually people say, well, faith is the same thing as trust, right? Well, not according to the words of the letter to the Hebrews. Faith means that we realize what we want. And for a lot of us, maybe the reason why we don't think of that as being an adequate definition of faith is that we don't desire the right things. A lot of people in this world have personal goals that really don't have anything to do with what we truly need as persons. We set goals that are based off of success and based off of career, based off of achievement. And when we base our entire life off of those sorts of things, even when we succeed, it always makes us end up feeling empty and sort of burnt out. And even when our goals are noble, like family and community and relationships, even those things can leave us feeling empty. And a lot of people never make it past those things. But if we can get past those things, we realize that the things that we hope for have to be eternal. They must. Because God made us for himself. And because of that, we will never be satisfied until we find our rest in God. And once we realize that, then the thing that we ought to hope for must be him. And only then do we have faith. So that's what the letter to the Hebrews means when it says that faith is the realization of what is hoped for. It's when we realize that we hope only in God. We realize that everything that we have ever wanted or needed for our fulfillment lies in him. And that should be our hope. There's also a second part to the definition that the letter to the Hebrew gives us, the definition of faith. The letter to the Hebrews also said that faith is evidence of things not seen. And that's the hard part about faith, really, is the evidence of things not seen. Because that means that when we have faith, we are certain that God will keep his promises, even though we can't see him, even though those promises haven't been fully realized. Evidence of things not seen means that we have faith. We know with certainty that the things God has revealed to us are true, even if he doesn't appeal to our senses. No one here in this room saw Jesus rise from the dead, but we believe that he did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Nobody here, unless a miracle occurs, can tell that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Jesus using taste or touch or sight. But we know that that's true. And that's the essence of faith, accepting something as true, not because our senses assure us that it is, but because the person who tells us that it's true is trustworthy. And God is trustworthy. And that's where many of today's intellectuals and cultural elites, that's where they mock us, because they consider faith to be childish, right? It's like a fairy tale. Mature people, they say, don't depend on faith. They depend on reliable things like science and reason, real tangible things, not some invisible God that may or may not be real, that may or may not be hiding out there somewhere. And because of this, they belittle those who believe and try to guilt those of us who still value faith into being sort of embarrassed by our faith. Because we're backwards or old-fashioned or, bigoted. And they bully us into keeping our faith to ourselves. But we shouldn't be embarrassed. Faith is a necessary part of any fully lived human life. And that's due to the fact of how we're made. God made us with a body and a soul. He made us both physical and spiritual. Eliminating faith is impossible, because getting rid of faith doesn't make us more mature, it makes us less human. But that's what the world has decided to do. We've put our faith in ourselves instead of God, and it's foolish. Why in the world would you ever put your faith in something as fragile and as sinful as a human being? But we have. And I believe that this is the root cause of all of the world's misery and all of the world's problems. And I know that to be true because putting faith in ourselves rather than God was the first sin. And it will probably be the last sin. But think of how damaging that is. For an entire generation, or maybe even more, we've been taught that anything is possible if you put your mind to it. You can do anything that you want if you try hard enough. And I harp on this notion a lot, but I do it for a reason, because people need to learn that it's not true. Believing in yourself to accomplish your dreams is a lie. And think of the damage that hearing that sort of thing your entire life would cause. When we're told that we can do anything, it leads to a lot of disappointment when we fail. Maybe we weren't trying hard enough. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm doing things wrong. But it isn't true. In actuality, there are very few things that you can completely do on your own. There are very few things that you can actually control. It's an ultimately selfish thought to think, I'm going to work really, really hard to get what I want. And we can complain about how entitled and whiny young people have become, but how can it come as any surprise when we've told them their whole lives that they can have whatever they want and do whatever they want? So stop telling them that. Stop saying you can do whatever you want, you can accomplish anything if you put your mind to it. Because think of what that does to the human person. Failure is a part of life. Suffering is unavoidable. We've all been told that it's avoidable if you try hard enough. And that mindset leads down some very dark roads. Because what if we fail? Is it our fault? Well, right now we have the highest depression and the highest suicide rate in human history. Maybe that's enough evidence for us. When you believe that you have the power to do anything, then anything bad that happens becomes your fault. And trust me, I know I've gone through hours of therapy to get that thought out of my head. God is the only one who can do anything. Nothing is possible without God, and with God, nothing is impossible. Everything you have is a gift from Him, and the second that we forget that, it will come back to bite us. Because relying solely on ourselves only gives way to frustration and discouragement when things don't go our way. We should not be surprised when things don't work out as we planned. We should not be surprised when we run into obstacles and difficulties that appear to be irrational. They don't make sense to us because most things are out of our control. Instead, we need to hand everything over to God. Surrender your goals and desires to Him. So that's faith. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. But what does faith do for us in our daily life? Well, faith gives us courage. There is one short line from the first reading, from the book of Wisdom, that says this: "The night of the Passover was known beforehand to our fathers, that with the knowledge of the oaths in which they put their faith, they might have courage." In other words, the Jews grew in courage when they recalled what God had done for them in the events of the Passover and the Exodus from Egypt. When you have true faith, it allows you to recall how good God is in the face of ridicule and in the face of danger and in the face of doubt. I hear it a lot, and I'm sure every other priest hears it a lot, how worried people are about the future, about the state of things, about the way things are going. And so if you're worried about the future, here are 3 pieces of advice, practical advice that I can give to you. The first one, and I know this will be hard for some of you to hear, turn off cable news. I used to love the scientific and rhetorical and intellectual sides of politics, but it made me miserable. And I gave up cable news about 5 years ago, and I'm a much better person for it now. There is literally nothing that will help your soul in watching cable news. Let me repeat that. There is literally nothing that will do good for your soul watching cable news. Because they talk about nothing except the world's problems, and they do it on a 24-hour basis. That's insanity. No wonder we're so depressed about the future. Instead, watch your local news, your local nightly news. That's enough. And look around you and do what you can to make the world better. And the rest is out of your control. The rest you trust to God. Second practical advice: if you fear the future and are depressed about the way things are going, give up social media. I've also done this. Actually, I never got into it in the first place. But social media is anything but social. That part is a lie. It's isolating. Talking to people without having to talk to people is not how we were designed. It's dehumanizing. When I take my students on our annual field trip and they're allowed to have their phones with them, unlike in school, they can't have their phones with them, but they take their phones with them and they're all sitting next to each other on the bus, but they're on their phones and they're texting and sending video and pictures to videos of themselves. And guess who they're sending them to? They're sending them to the people sitting right next to them in the same bus, even though they're not talking verbally. That's really weird, and it's going to get very complicated psychologically later on. Social media is basically one of two things. It's either people arguing about politics, which is just an extension of the 24-hour news cycle, or it's a way to convince others that you are pretty or smart or happy or funny or popular. And that only leads us to judging ourselves on whether or not we are pretty or smart or happy or funny or popular. And then it leads us to judge others based off of if they're happy or smart or funny or popular or pretty. You only see the good part of people's lives on TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. And that's fake, because life is more than goofy pictures or hot poses or memes. When I direct retreats for high school students, one of the first things that we do is we take the students' phones from them. And they actually don't put up that much of a fight. Because I think really deep down they know that it's a burden to have to keep up with all the social media. And guess what? By the end of the retreat, they've made 30 new actual friends, not Facebook friends. And when they're leaving, we basically have to remind them to take their phones with them because they've forgotten all about them. And it's remarkable how little it takes to get back to the basics, to get back to faith. Finally, third practical piece of advice: if you fear the future and the way things are going, pray for the virtue of faith. It's as simple as that. Because when our faith is genuine, and when we truly trust in God and what He's done for us, nothing can compare. All of this world and all of this world's problems are nothing next to God. I was on retreat this past week, and we had a very good retreat master. His name is Father Brennan. And he's done a lot of things in his life. He was the vice rector, which is sort of like the director of the Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland. His diocese, he's from Savannah, Georgia, so he had a southern accent, but he was a vocations director for his diocese. He now is a spiritual director at a seminary in Ohio. He was a parish priest. He's an exorcist. He's a spiritual director. But his real love is ministering to brother priests. He's given over 100 retreats to priests. And he was talking about gloomy priests and priests that are too busy and how damaging that is to the church. Instead, he told us that if we truly believe in the gospel that we preach, then we ought to be joyful. If we truly believe, if we truly have faith, there's nothing to be upset about. There's nothing to be worried about. And Father Brennan was right. The verdict is out. Jesus has already won. He's already defeated sin. He's already conquered death. When your faith is mocked, when we're dismayed about the future and the culture of the world around us, that's only because the devil is trying his hardest because he knows his days are numbered. He knows he only has a limited time to ensnare as many souls as he can for himself. The devil is not all-powerful. He's a fallen angel, created by God, just as you and I were created by God. In fact, the devil is actually quite weak, and in comparison to God, he's nothing. He trembles in fear before God, and demons flee simply at saying the name of Jesus Christ. So do not fear. Have faith instead. And keeping that in mind is the solution to all the frustration and discouragement that we can experience in life. It's the only way to peace. It's the only way it's the only place we can turn to when the world has rejected God, when the world has rejected us, believers. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. He is what we hope for. He is everything that we could ever want. And the evidence is the love that he has shown to us each and every day of our lives.